Welcome to Season 4 of AIHA's podcast series, The Healthier Workplaces Show, where we explore timely and informative topics about occupational and environmental health and safety to help you improve your workplace. I'm your host, Alonso Castillo. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with occupational hygienist Krista Thompson. Krista is an occupational hygienist at the Occupational Health Clinics for Ontario Workers. She has over 18 years of experience in conducting occupational hygiene surveys, indoor air quality assessments, ergonomic assessments, as well as writing policies and procedures to ensure clients comply with legislation. Krista has a bachelor's degree in life science from Queen's University and a master's degree in occupational and environmental health from the University of Toronto. Krista is the secretary-elect of AIHA's Women in Industrial Hygiene Committee. She also leads the International Women's Day Subcommittee. Today we'll talk to Krista about her career, the challenges women in industrial hygiene may encounter, and how we can support women in this field. Krista, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Let's get started. So let's start from the beginning. How did you discover occupational hygiene and what made you become interested in this field?
So I started in life sciences. This is a field with a lot of anatomy courses, physiology courses, toxicology courses, and I was looking to do some graduate studies. I started looking at what graduate studies were basically around me and that sounded interesting. And I came across the program at the University of Toronto, Occupational and Environmental Health. That one caught my eye because I had actually been working my summers at a factory, and the factory was DuPont, very known for their safety. So I had this amazing background in being trained through this summer job.
Is there a moment in your career that shaped your perspective as an occupational hygienist?
One in particular that stands out was actually a really large project. I was in consulting, private consulting, and the consultant company was involved in a cleanup of remote military sites in northern Canada. These sites were long abandoned, contaminated with toxic materials, with debris. The buildings were quite literally falling down, and they were going to clean them up. So the consulting firm I worked for was brought in to oversee some of the environmental and occupational exposures during the cleanup. So this was a fly-in, fly-out opportunity. And the team I was involved with, we would take turns being on site for up to 2 weeks at a time. This was, I want to say, like the World Series of industrial hygiene, because you had everything going on. You had the large industrial monitoring. You had complicated site logistics because there was no way to get in other than a charter plane.
Wow.
So you had to really look after those samples before they went out. We even had to set up a small lab on site to do some analysis. It wasn't a validated lab, so we did 10% sampling at validated labs. But in the meantime, we were doing our own to know what the exposures were, to make sure the exposures were acceptable. And at the same time, we had environmental monitoring going on to ensure that the same consulting firm, not necessarily me directly, but to ensure that there were no harms to the environment as well. And it was the first time I was involved with such a large industrial project with so much complicated logistics, but also that working together of occupational environmental exposures really just shaped my whole career and seeing how it's all connected. It all comes together.
That sounds so exciting. Were there any particular challenges with this project?
Oh, there were so many challenges. So for anything that had to remain either refrigerated or frozen for the media, we had to make sure that those refrigerators or freezers were on generators with backups. In case power was lost, we had to be aware of wildlife. This was a remote site where wildlife includes polar bears. So we also had to work with people whose entire job was to be aware of where the local polar bears were and keep an eye on ensuring the site was safe. So if I wanted to go do some air sampling, I had to coordinate with these individuals to make sure I could go in that area, that it was safe today, and they would come with me to stay near me and keep me safe while I was working there. So it was a whole nother level of complication with that.
Wow, that sounds so interesting. I feel like that's just a field day of amazing work.
It was, and you'd be there 2 weeks straight. So it was 2 weeks of working every day, like 12-hour days to do all this monitoring, and then you leave for, a month and come back. So you really got to see when you were there everything that was happening. You were aware of all of the remediation that was ongoing, all of the soil cleanup that was happening. Everything was all happening so quickly. It's amazing when you're working these long days, how much can get done.
I have to ask, are those days, do they pass by very fast, or is it very slow because there's just so much going on?
Oh my gosh, those 2 weeks they felt like a long time when you were there because you did so much. Like at the
Of
end of these
course.
2 weeks, you'd have your massive amount of samples for, asbestos, lead, isocyanates, whatever was being monitored, but it felt like a blink of the eye.
Wow, that's incredible. Okay, well, let's transition a little bit to the main topic today, which is the challenges women face in industrial hygiene. A March 2024 Synergist article by Christina Roll notes that of the roughly 370,000 people working in OHS, only 21% are women. How can we increase the representation of women in this profession?
I think it comes down to two things: awareness of our field. We need to let everyone know, not just women, we need everyone to be more aware of industrial hygiene and how important it is. And we need to build up our pipeline of girls and young women, getting girls and teenagers interested in STEM, and then teaching them how fun industrial hygiene is. Because I know sometimes those long days when you go to a site, you're there at 5 a.m. to get the pre-calibration done. When the alarm goes off, it doesn't necessarily feel fun, but it's always really fun when you get to the site. Like that's so much fun. So I think that awareness of the field and getting girls and young women into it is the answer to everything.
Absolutely. And talking more about this awareness, are there any systemic barriers that affect the safety of women in the workplace?
There are. There's a lot of barriers. First of all, PPE, personal protective equipment. A lot of brands still do what they call shrink it and pink it. It's happening
Hmm.
less and less, but there are still a lot of the big brands that just make their PPE smaller and say, well, that'll fit women. When you look at the average woman's body to the average man's body, there are different proportions that are not always taken into account, but also how much they shrink it. They size it down to a very petite woman. So now we're putting it into a very small category of women that it's going to fit. When you don't have PPE that fits you, that does send a message that you don't belong at the site. So that's a huge barrier. It may not be a conscious message that everyone's thinking out loud, if that makes sense, but it's
Of course.
there in the back of your mind. This hard hat doesn't fit. The safety vest doesn't fit. The fire retardant clothing doesn't fit. This wasn't made for me because I'm not supposed to be here. And that's a worry I have. There's just so many anatomical and physiological differences that need to be addressed. And PPE is just the tip of the iceberg.
Virtual Connect is the most convenient and affordable way to access quality education and insights about the OHS industry. Learn more at aihaconnect.org/virtualconnect. Is there a lack of health and safety infrastructure for women?
Yes. So looking at crash test dummies are the perfect example. Crash test dummies are based on the average male. And more recently, there's an average petite woman being used. With the average male, that is based on the average male a few decades ago, and it's not necessarily representative now, which is also a problem. The very petite woman that's just recently started being used is going to protect some small women, but it's not going to let you know about all sizes. It becomes challenging because the range of human sizes is large. Where do you pick it? But we do know that there are different forces being exerted on the skeletal system depending on the seatbelt placement, and this is going to have impacts because of the musculoskeletal system differences that women's anatomy and physiology tends to have. It's going to result in different internal organs and a different risk factor for internal damage. More than that, it's not just the crash test dummies. That's one that's, I think there's been a little bit of awareness about the last year or two. For example, if someone is driving big construction gear, so the seats there are going to be designed for the average male body. They are going to have everything there, where the levers are located, where the steering wheel is, whatever else is going to be based on the average male. So it's going to have differences for how the woman uses it that can result in issues or risks to your health or safety.
And I'm curious, are there any certain chemical exposures that tend to affect women more often than men?
Okay, this is a great question. If you had asked me this a year ago, I probably would have answered differently. But a recent review was published by the British Occupational Hygiene Society, or BOHS, that has really opened my eyes. This is showing that women have higher rates of occupational diseases and occupational cancers than men with comparable exposures. Before this, guessed that they were probably similar with a few select differences. But this data is showing us that's not the case. The same exposure is resulting in more occupational diseases in women than men with the same exposure. So that is something that needs to be further investigated and we need to be aware of. There's also emerging data showing the impacts of shift work. This can have impacts on women's reproductive health, and non-traditional shifts can result in reproductive health effects as well. This is also newer data within the last 5 to 10 years that's coming out. So there's still a lot we don't know. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, do we know what we need to know about the differences between men's and women's health effects from chemical exposures? I would have said yes, for the most part, barring perhaps some differences in the female versus male organs. This data is showing us otherwise. We need to know more about what the risks are to women that are different than men. And currently, BOHS and other groups are investigating that.
Now, as you know, AIHA hosts the Personal Protective Equipment Fashion Show every year at AIHA Connect. How is that event related to the need to develop appropriate PPE for women?
So we need to have this fashion show as a fun event with that serious reminder that not one brand is going to fit everyone, or not one style is going to fit everyone. So we need to know that and remind ourselves that these differences matter in terms of PPE.
How is that event related to the need to develop appropriate PPE for women?
Okay, so that PPE fashion show, it is a fun event. It's a highlight of a lot of us for the conference, but it underscores something more serious. So we need PPE that fits. As I talked about before, if it doesn't fit, you're getting that subtle message that you don't belong, but also you're not protected. So we need to have this fun moment with this serious reminder. We're using it as a focus on women's sizes because historically the PPE has not fit women. I think you can talk to any woman in any industrial sector, or anyone who's worn PPE. Any woman who's worn PPE has told you that the lab coat didn't go over their hips, or the FRC, they had to go up a size so that it could fit over their hips, as one example, or perhaps something hung way too long on them. But also, there's more than just women's size ranges, there's men's size ranges. When you take a look at smaller men and larger men, they have some of those same issues too. A small man isn't going to have necessarily the exact same proportions as the average man. We're going to also have large men, and large men can be very tall, broad shoulders. They could be men with large guts. These are all different sizes where we need PPE of a range of styles to fit a range of bodies. If we're not wearing our PPE properly, it's not going to protect us properly. And that's what this comes down to. This fun event is highlighting this very serious issue.
And talking about serious issues, I want to talk more about organizational bias. How might organizational bias affect women in the workplace?
Yeah, that is a serious issue. And I think there's a few things going on. Most organizations don't even realize if they're biased. We have systemic bias, we have unconscious bias. What does that mean? What does that look like? So systemic bias, most organizations think they don't have it, but the reality is the pay gap is still there between women and men doing the same job. So there's obviously something going on. When you look at some of the studies of human resources studies in particular, so HR groups, they find that performance appraisals do tend to favor men in very subtle ways. Not by performing men outright, but by looking at metrics that are more likely to favor men. So the one example I've seen is measuring face time, so the amount of time you're in the office or on the job site. This can be a bias against women for a few reasons. So women still do perform more housework than men, and they tend to do more childcare or elder care on average in people who are doing childcare or elder care than men. So they have more out of work responsibilities. A lot of women will go home at the end of their job, when the day ends, but it doesn't mean that they aren't going to work later. They might finish that report after they've put their kid down, for instance. I mean, ideally we get our job done in our set hours, but that doesn't always happen, right? It doesn't always happen. Whereas the men who are able to stay late in the office because they are more likely, again, we're talking about averages, we're not talking about individuals, but on average, if they're able to stay late, and that face time being present in the office can actually get them a better performance appraisal. Now you've got a systemic bias against women. It doesn't mean they're performing better or not. That's not, what that metric is measuring. So that's one example of systemic bias that can exist. Going on to unconscious bias, that can be everything from just assuming because this job is messy, or this job is going to be long hours, or this job is going to be some factor, assuming this woman isn't going to want to do it without letting her weigh in. So there have been studies also looking at this. One study I found showed that male applicants are actually rated more highly than comparable female applicants for the same metric without the person doing the evaluation even realizing they were doing that rating higher. So when someone independently looked at the data blinded to who was who, they found that the person doing the review who knew the sex would rate the man higher. Again, this is unconscious. The people involved did not realize it. And there's also been studies looking at women in leadership, and they're finding that women in leadership get lower performance evaluations than matched men. So we have this unconscious bias. How do we remove that? I don't know that you can really remove your unconscious bias. It's always there. It's about structuring everything in a way so that you reduce those systemic biases and then acknowledging our unconscious biases so that we can do something about it.
Absolutely. I feel like we have to acknowledge and we have to bring into awareness that there is organizational bias. Is there any way that recognizing this bias can change it to a positive change?
Oh, absolutely. As soon as you recognize your bias, you can do something about it. So if you are recognizing that your face time, your amount of time in the office is a performance metric, you can adjust that to instead look at reports being completed on time as one example. So now we've removed that requirement to stay late and recognize that some people do work at home. This is changing, I think, more and more now that there are so many work from home options that weren't around more than 5 years ago. But it does impact women more, so let's make it equal for everyone. Another really big example is, and it doesn't apply to all women, but it does apply to all women who are parents, who are mothers. So, or fathers, men can be helped by this too. So if you are in an organization that can have family leave, both maternity and paternity, now you're helping giving everyone this chance to have this time because infant care is so demanding and it's such a very short period of time in someone's career. It can really make for an even playing field, but also benefit the workers and employees in ways that we really can't quantify. Getting those couple of months to stay home with an infant isn't something you can ever truly put a value on, and yet it's priceless.
Let's change topics. Tell me more about the Women in IH Committee. Why did AIHA form this committee?
So the AIHA formed the Women in Industrial Hygiene Committee in 2018 in order to offer a resource for women to gather to discuss professional career development and leadership skills. So 2018, for the first year, it opened with a series of town halls of AIHA members to sort of investigate what might this committee offer? What should this committee do moving forward? Right now, what we've expanded. We have usually one large thing around International Women's Day at the start of March. We also have a town hall meeting every April, and we invite everyone at AIHA to attend this. We share the information on the catalyst for this annual town hall meeting. This year, the theme is on reproductive health issues in the workplace. We are also really excited. One thing we've been working on for the past few years is fundraising to have a scholarship, and 2025 is going to be the first year that we award this scholarship.
Congrats, that's so exciting.
Thank you. We are over the moon about this. So we have scholarships set aside for attending AIHA hosted programming. So conferences, leadership development, workshops, and seminars. We will be announcing the first recipients, I believe in May, very, very soon. So we are, like I said, over the moon. We are thrilled about this. This is something we've been working really hard on to have this as an opportunity. And we've been just trying to grow our committee as well. And I think having this scholarship really grows and solidifies our committee in a way that, just in a tangible way that we didn't have before.
I think this committee is creating the small steps that will eventually create the bigger steps to change this field. I want to talk more about the bigger picture for a second.
Sure.
What progress has the OHS field made within the last few decades for women regarding health and safety in the workplace?
I think that there's, it's surprising, but this acknowledgement that women's physiology is different, that is something that I did not see talked about at the start of my career, which is less than 20 years ago. I just didn't see that discussion. So I think the acknowledgement that, yes, there is different physiology, different anatomy, different health effects, that's a huge one. That's for monitoring the health and safety of the workers that we're actually doing the monitoring for. When it comes to people working within the field, I think the PPE fashion show and the discussions around PPE is sort of symbolic of other changes in that we recognize PPE needs to be different. We recognize other aspects of the field have to be different, and that is slowly changing. When I say slowly, that's actually not fair, because I say slowly, I'm thinking back over 18 years. But when you think about the grand scheme of the industrial hygiene as a career, as a sector, it has changed monumentally. We are changing, and I don't face sexism for the most part in this field. I don't reach out to my colleagues and have sexist responses. I find all of my colleagues to be very supportive. And I don't always get that. When I was in consulting and I would go to a client site, not all clients' places were like that.
Of course.
But within the OHS field, I definitely feel like I belong.
That's great news. That's great to hear.
Yes, it is. I think other women, in my very informal polls of chatting with other women in OEHS, they're saying the same thing. Our colleagues believe we belong here, and we feel that. We really do.
You absolutely belong here. Let me ask you this. What do you foresee in 20 years? How would it be like?
Oh my gosh, what would I love in 20 years? I would love for the Women in IH committee to be even larger. I would love if we were like all laughing about the idea that once upon a time there wasn't pay equity. Oh, remember that? Wasn't that the dark ages? That's not an issue now. I think that also, a review of some of the occupational exposure limits for, are the occupational exposure limits not protective enough for women? Or is it the PPE not being adequate? What is that's been causing these higher rates of occupational diseases that we were talking about earlier? What is it that's causing that? If we had that identified and addressed, I think that would be huge and towards impacting, women working in every sector.
Absolutely. What else should the OHS profession be doing in this respect?
I think the biggest thing is remember that women belong. Women belong wherever there are jobs. Every sector, there might be some modifications, but if you think back to it, those modifications can be made. And the reason I know this, think about World War II. Okay, most of the men went to Europe. The older men and some men stayed behind, but for the most part, the factories were filled with women and everything got made. They couldn't expect the women to lift some of the things they used to expect men to do. So they got lifting devices. There were issues with long hair. They'd never had to think about that because most men had short hair. So the women pulled their hair back or covered their hair with a cap. All it takes is modifications, and women can do basically everything and can make the workplace stronger. There's so much evidence around how when you have women in the workplace, you can make for a stronger, a more diverse workforce overall. So that's what I would like to see is, just accept and remember that women belong. And if there's a modification, great. So modifications can be made. We are creative. OEHS professionals are creative people. We can make changes happen.
Absolutely. Let's make changes.
Yes, absolutely.
What efforts will the Women in IH community take on in the near future?
So our big thing that we have going on right now is in April, we're going to have a town hall open to everyone. I mentioned that briefly. We're going to have a couple of women talk about their work procedures that they have for their workplaces where they have known reproductive hazards. That is a big one. Also in May, for those going to AIHA Connect, we're going to have the PPE fashion show. And immediately following the fashion show, we're going to have our in-person meeting. And anyone can come. So if you are listening to this podcast and you're at AHA Connect, find the Women Industrial Hygiene Committee and attend our meeting. We would love to see you there. Those are two of our bigger things we have going on right now. We have a few other subcommittees working on things. We're going to be updating our description on the webpage as one tiny example, but we've got lots of things planned for the fall as well.
As you heard here, if you're interested, get involved. Absolutely. Change is needed. Krista, as we approach the end of this episode, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
Oh my gosh, yes. I am so glad you had this question. So, our Women in Industrial Hygiene Committee recently hosted a panel, and the theme was on women in industrial hygiene and occupational and environmental health and safety. We are going to be having this panel put on the AIHA YouTube page in the very near future. Possibly by the time someone's listening to this podcast, you can go find this panel. This was a 1-hour conversation. We had Larry Sloan, AIHA CEO. We also had Jennifer McNally, who's CEO of the American Society of Safety Professionals. We had Lorraine Martin, who is CEO of the National Safety Council, and Nancy Wilk. She's the president of the International Occupational Hygiene Association. She's also a very active member of the Women in Industrial Hygiene group, and she was on this podcast about 4 months ago. So they had this panel where they were talking about the issues. What struck me most about this panel was when we reached out to each person. All 4 of them did not hesitate to say, yes, I'm in, let's make it work. That, I think, speaks to the attitude of OEHS professionals. We will make it work. That's who we are at our core. We are all going to make it work. And the fact that they all jumped up, yes, I want to be involved. So what I want to share with the audience is that this recording is out there. And also that we have a really great CEO. Like, for him to jump up that fast and be like, I'm in, like, fabulous. We can't ask for anything better than that. He was like, we will make this happen. It will happen. Let's find it. You know, with people that busy, finding a date can be hard, but they're like, we will move things if we need to. I'm gushing now, but I was so thrilled with that response from all 4 of them, really. So that is available, and I want everyone to listen to that because I think you'll get a lot of insight into women, but I think you'll get a lot of insight, I think, into OEHS professionals in general.
That's great to hear. If anybody's interested in watching the video, it will be in the description below. That wraps up today's episode of the AIHA Healthier Workplaces show. Krista, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your thoughts about the challenges women in OHS face and what we can do to support women in the OHS profession. Listeners, if you're interested in learning more about AIHA's work to protect the health and safety of workers of all genders, visit our website and follow us on social media. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, remember that healthier workplaces means a healthier world. Till next time.